Welcome to our last digital conversation. This is on cross-cultural communication. In your Hamilton book, there are a couple of references to cross-cultural communication, but the majority of what's in this deck is a material that I'm presenting. So as you're preparing for your exams, both blue and crimson track, pay close attention to the material that's in this deck. And if you're confused about it, please come on into the colloquials and I'll be glad to expand on it to make sure you understand each of these elements of cross-cultural communication. We're now looking at a global environment. Even if you work in Sacramento, there's a high probability you're going to be operating with people from another country, either as peers or the company you work for may be selling product or services globally, or you may be owned by a company from another country. I've had the opportunity to spend really the last 20 years or more working globally. And some of that work is done in emerging markets. I had the opportunity to go into China when it first opened up in the late 80s. Then had a chance to go into the Russian Far East right after the barriers came down and they started to look at the market economy. And when I looked at these environments, and these are just emerging markets, I find that many American business people just are not emotionally and even physically equipped to do business in that environment. From the emotional side, it takes a great deal of toughness to be able to operate in these environments. Many of these environments are anti-American, and you're going to be attacked simply because of your being an American, and you have to be able to deal with that. We talked in another session around sexual harassment. In other countries, that is the norm, and again, unless you can figure out ways to survive in that environment, it's going to be very, very tough. The physical side is the amount of energy that it takes to work globally is incredibly challenging. Most of us look at people that have international jobs and think about how exhilarating it is, how much fun it must be to be operating in a different country every week. But just the physical movement of your body between time zones and long flights on airplanes, 14, 15, 16 hours, is very, very telling. And there are really very few that can do this and do this extremely well. So let's take a look at communications in this international environment. In the past, we were able to operate with very limited contact in a global basis. And when we were needing to have an exchange with somebody from another country, interpreters were very, very available. Just like President Obama brought his anger translator into his presentation. If you haven't seen that, that's worth looking up on YouTube. Now you're in a situation where there's a great deal of one-on-one interpersonal communication when you're going into another country. The timelines that you operate on are very, very short. You're going into another country, you probably have a flight leaving for another country within a day or 2 days, so you have to get things done. You're operating alone. Oftentimes you're in another country and your manager may be in San Francisco, maybe in New York, maybe in Dallas, and here you are in Singapore or Beijing. So you're not having that much direct supervision, and you're out there on your own. You maybe have contact via email or Skype with your home office, but when you're sitting in that factory in remote China, it's you. So your ability to communicate in that environment is a skill that can be learned, but it takes work. At the core, we need to understand what culture is. Hopefully you're paying attention in your anthropology classes and you're able to get a good understanding of culture. This is a formal definition of it, but really what is a good takeaway is a culture helps people understand what they can expect from a society and also understand what society expects from them. And that's where people get very confused when they start to move to another culture or they're doing business in another culture, because simple things like the role of an organization or a business may be different because of its culture. In one culture, a business may exist to provide jobs to the people in a region. In another culture, the business exists to produce profit for its stockholders. So again, you can take this very simple model and make it very, very complex. I had the opportunity to work with Ford Motor in Shenyang, and it was a very interesting experience because Ford had created almost a mini city in that part of China, and while there was a regional culture within the Ford Motor factory, they even had their own culture, which we had to start to understand. There's some myths attached to intercultural work. One is the world is one big happy family. We're all the same under the skin, and we're going to get together if we can just meet each other and sing songs and have a big kumbaya moment. In reality, that simply isn't the case. That the universality myth gets distorted. Even when I work in Asia, people say, well, this is the Asian culture, or this is a Chinese culture. But when you start to parse it, you'll see that even in China, there are many, 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 many subcultures. And if you're going to be working there, you have to respond appropriately to the subculture that you're operating in. So yes, there may be some common threads in humanity, but when you start to take a look at the power of culture, you'll see that there's also significant differences. So some of the ways that people differ, Gert Hofstede, a faculty member out of the Netherlands, did a seminal piece of research for IBM, and IBM was trying to create a global culture that where everybody in IBM wore the same suits, ties, all that other type of regalia. And they were very upset that when they started to take a look at their organization globally, they discovered that there was significant difference. And they surveyed their workforce globally with over 700,000 data points. And they brought the data back, couldn't figure it out. And then they did it again, and they still couldn't figure out. So they brought in Professor Hofstede, who then did a study on it, and he said, the issue you're running into is that national cultures are different in these dimensions, and you need to understand those in order to understand the countries. So one of the dimensions is power distance, and power distance denotes how willing people are to accept a hierarchical structure. In the United States, we like flat. In other countries, they like a very stratified power structure. Another dimension is uncertainty avoidance, so how willing are people to take risks? Again, in the United States, we tend to think of ourselves as high risk takers, but when you study us as a culture, we really aren't. We have a lot of rules, laws, regulations, social support systems. People can file bankruptcy. In other cultures, if your business goes bad, you pay back the money that you borrowed, or your family pays back the money that you borrowed, but somebody's going to pay back the money. Individualist versus collective cultures, again, America tends to be fairly individualistic. We look at the freedom of individuals to take action. We provide opportunities for the individual to succeed. In collectivist cultures, it's more focused starting with the family, and then it starts with the immediate village or tribe, and then it expands to the region, and then it expands for the good of the country. So the individual in all of those, in family and in tribe and in village and in region and in country, is secondary. That society acts for the good of society, not for the individual. And masculine-feminine dimension isn't what you think. It's not a gender-related term, it's a behavior-related term. In masculine cultures, if you have wealth, you demonstrate it. There's a show of wealth. And in feminine cultures, it's more about who you are as a person. So in those cultures, it's, are you a person of substance? Are you a person with wisdom? That is what's valued. Masculine cultures, how many toys do you have? How big is your bank account? What is the size of your house? And all those lead to different ways of communicating that are appropriate to that context. Professor Halls did a research on defining cultures as either high context or low context, and we introduced that before. So in high context cultures, again, you read what's going on around you and it's your responsibility to translate. Low context cultures, a lot is explained to you, just like this course. We provide you the book, we provide you the slide deck, we provide you these videos, we provide a review before the exam, and then you take the exam. In another culture, they would say, we're going to study business communication. Here's 40 books in the library, go figure it out, and we'll get together once a week and talk about it. Second language is fascinating. And again, I got to disclose a clear bias. I thought I had a mental impairment until I had my hearing tested and I found I have a hard time replicating sounds. So I am a total disaster when it comes to learning a foreign language. The written part I can nail, the spoken part I can't do so well. But those of you that have the gift of language, if you're going in for an assignment in another country that's more than 2 to 3 months long, take the time to master as much of the language as you can. If it's a shorter period, you can get by. The other piece that I've learned globally is most countries except the United States are very forgiving of people that don't speak their native language. I've been accommodated, and people talk about the arrogance of France. I worked there this summer and they were very forgiving in the few words of French that I use that are grossly mispronounced, and they will try to seek out ways to communicate with me so we can get the job done. But there's absolutely no excuse for biculturalism. And what that means, if you're going into a country, even for a short stay, take the time to study the culture. Understand the norms of the people that you're going into, do business with, and then work very hard not to offend. So there's no excuse for not doing your job. And there's some really fun literature that you can get engaged in where Americans go into other countries and the American arrogance of bringing our slogans, our statements to those countries somehow don't work out particularly well. I'm sure that Pepsi did not take an ad campaign into Germany thinking that they were going to call people up from the dead and create a nation of zombies. Nonverbal communication is also a critical part of your mastery of that culture. The proper greetings, handshakes, bows, hugs are very important to master. You need to be dressing appropriately. I've learned through some embarrassment that in Europe I need to dress very differently than I do in casual California. Space is very critical. Remember we talked about interpersonal space, social space. In some countries, just prepare to have people very, very close to you all the time. The appropriate amount of touch. Some Americans are huggers. You can go into another culture where if you were to do that, it'd be highly offensive. Posture, again, we talked about presenting authority. You want to be able to do that in a way that countries pay close attention to that. The California slouching is usually not a universal behavior. Hand gestures, got to be really cautious about the hand gestures that you use. A hand gesture in our culture that may be very positive can be used in another country as a signal that's very, very offensive. Time, we talked about monochromatic, polychromatic time, so again, be aware of how time is handled in these countries. Food, this is a fairly big deal. When you're working in another country, eat the damn food. And if you have to take Pepto or some other stomach treatment before you go out, take it, but eat the food that's offered to you. Food is highly connected to a culture, and it is extremely offensive if you say, oh, I don't eat that, or yuck, or you get the idea. So Be a good traveler. Gifts are also interesting because in the United States we have anti-corruption laws. And in other countries, unless you bring a gift, that's seen as a sign of disrespect. So that gets real tricky, and it even gets to where if you're working with people at this level, it's this level of gift. If you're working with people at the top of the organization, it has to be an appropriate gift for somebody in that role. And as we talked about before, sexism is very prevalent in some countries, and you need to develop the mental toughness to be able to deal with it, work past it, and get the job done. It's not pleasant, it's offensive, but it's something that we have to deal with, which goes back to my opening slide. That culture's job or that country's job is not to make you comfortable. It's your job to be comfortable in that culture and to be respectful of that culture. So what does it take to get the job done? First is you cannot be ethnocentric. The American way is the only way. The California way is the only way. Be very open to other cultures and what they have to offer. When I opened up, I talked about the anti-Americanism. You can't become defensive. Just accept the fact that you're going to be held accountable for every policy that our government has made since time memorial. So don't take it defensively, or don't become defensive. Become curious. You have the gift of looking at the world through another set of eyes. I travel because that is my anti-dementia strategy. I've found through research that one of the ways that I can fight old age is by keeping the neural networks open and forming new connections within my brain. And research is telling us that travel is one of the ways that is hyper-stimulating to keep your brain functioning. Be brave, not stupid, but be brave. Try that new food, go into that factory setting, take those hikes so you can see the countryside, venture into a small village. Be very empathetic. I find international travel is incredibly humbling. I did some reading before I went to France and studied what took place during the German occupation during World War II. And I could not look at a French citizen in their 60s, 70s, or 80s with almost tears coming to my eyes, looking at the hardship that they suffered during that period of time. So connect with the people, be understanding. If they're struggling with language, just think how much you're struggling trying to master their language. If their concepts are different than yours, work through it. Be very patient. Be patient with yourself. Cut yourself a little bit of slack when you're in these areas. Be industrious. There is not a Kinko on every corner in remote China. And if something breaks, you gotta figure out how to make it work. And you don't have a support staff from the home office right behind you. So practice self-reliance. And then be generally personable. And if you don't have a personality, rent one for the trip. Because you want to project warmth, you want to project somebody that people want to do business with. And if you can do that, you can be very, very successful. And as I said at the start, my job is to make you a unique individual that's going to be attracted to employers. And if you're someone that can exhibit these behaviors and you do well in international assignments, you're going to be put into a compartment that is a very, very positive compartment to be in. We also have a gift here in Sac State that we have a highly international campus. So get out of your bubble and make an effort to connect with people from other parts of the world. We have a whole international studies part of campus here in the library buildings. Take the time to go in and introduce yourself to students from other countries. Your classmates, take a look at people in the class and say, oh, this individual's from China, this individual's from some part of Africa, this person's from South America. take the time to meet them and practice your cross-cultural skills with them, so when you go out to the employer, you have it nailed. All right, this winds up our video taping for you. If you're ever on campus and go down in the lower level of the library, look up our videographers and say thank you for helping you be able to have access to this information.